You're listening to Building the Broncos with Nick Kendell and Carl Dumler, Broncos Country's leading draft and scouting analysts. Head on over to milehighhuddle.com to sound off on all things Broncos.
Hello there, Broncos Country, and it is once again time for another episode of Building the Broncos. I'm your host, Carl Dumler, and with me as always, I have my co-host and good friend, Mr. Nick Kendell. Nick, how many more days till the wedding?
It is 26 days, so
26.
It is going to be here soon. Starting to get everything together, lined up, and really just excited to get out to Colorado. Honestly, I actually had a listener of the podcast reach out to me and ask me for my wedding registry. So that's man, you guys are awesome. Thank you for putting up with me and talking about the wedding and everything like that. It really just, don't want to throw out the blessed word too much, but pretty just amazing thing that we get to do here.
Yeah, for sure, man. I'm excited for you. I heard there was a colossal snowstorm that moved into the Rockies.
Mostly
already.
Up in Montana, but
okay.
Yes.
Okay. So I guess that makes me a little nervous if you're having an October wedding in Colorado. But
yeah, you never know.
It's hard to tell. I always go back to the I know most people don't want to talk about it, but the 2012 playoffs where it was like 5 degrees during the Baltimore game. And then the next Sunday, when the Broncos would have been playing if they won that game, it was like 55 in Denver. So it's hard to tell out there in the Rockies. It's a little bit they're almost warmer than what you and I have in Iowa and Kansas. It's just kind of crazy. Sometimes it's actually warmer there than here, but so be it. And unfortunately, it has been a little bit cold watching the Broncos this year. They've broken some hearts, broken some souls, and but we're here to maybe show you that everything is not as bad as it seems. Especially, we're gonna have a great guest on today. I'm very, very excited about him. Benjamin Allbright is joining us. One of the best Denver Bronco voices out there. Very, very excited. And you do not want to miss that. And also, we just want to present some players also. I mean, we always do this stock up and stock down. So I'll get to that. But I want to make sure that you can find us on Twitter. You can find me at Carl Dumler, MHH. And of course, Nick at Nick Kendell, MHH. And you can follow the podcast Twitter account at BTB Football Pod. And make sure you subscribe to our show and leave us a rating as we value your input. You can find the show on iTunes, Stitcher, and even that of YouTube. Also, make sure you head on over to milehighhuddle.com, a new affiliate of the Maven Coalition and Sports Illustrated. This podcast is powered by Overtime Media.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
Well, Nick, like I said, another heartbreaker. Another Broncos get the lead with 2 minutes to go, and defense, unfortunately, could not get the job done.
Yeah, it's, another kick to the groin, as they say. And it's unfortunately becoming all too common in Broncos country. The Broncos, they're a young team, kind of have a weird mix right now of some veterans that were there during the Manning era and kind of this new era of guys coming up. But as everybody's hinting, this is a team that's still figuring out how to win. And, it's going to be probably a rough season in that regard. And it just got that much more rough hearing that Bradley Chubb is out for the year with a torn ACL, Listening to his interview, I have no doubt that he's going to come back, bigger, better than ever. But that's a big blow, because I want to ask you this. We talked about this, I think, in the offseason, but Chubb might not be the single best player on the Broncos right now, but I have a hard time not imagining that he is the most valuable player on this Broncos team.
Well, you got to think of age, obviously. You got to think of contract. All of that factored in. Yes, he becomes probably a little bit more valuable than Von Miller, because you're looking
on the
at
open
this,
market.
Right. Especially on the open market, you're probably getting first round pick, second round pick, and probably a little bit extra, at least, for him. Even with this injury, even with the fact that he's going to miss the rest of this year. Just because he has that dominant force about him, had that great rookie year. Everybody was talking him up this year. And honestly, he's looked pretty dominant. He just hasn't had the numbers because the secondary hasn't held up. There's been a lot of plays where he is there in like 1.5 seconds. but the quarterback's getting rid of it in 1 second. And you're kind of going, I'm sorry, but he can't do anything about that. You can't get there any faster than what he did. So I'm excited to see him come back, but you're right. He is probably the most valuable player on this Broncos team. Maybe if Drew Lock shows something, then he maybe can pass him just because quarterback is so valuable. But beyond that, there's nobody else right now that I could really point to and say, yep, that's the guy.
It's too bad, but, that's the NFL. Guys are going to get hurt. So on what already appears like a lost season, 0-4, losing Chubb, that might have been the final nail in the coffin. But there's still, only one team can win the Super Bowl.
Right.
Like there's other things to take from it.
And can I look at the bittersweet side of this, I guess, a little bit?
Sure, I'll allow it.
At least it's happening early in the season.
Yeah.
So it's not affecting 2020. He should be back fully healthy by the time the season rolls around next year. I'm guessing it'll be touch and go. I'm guessing he'll miss most of the off-season work. But by the time around training camp, I would guess that he's probably going to be getting ready for practice, getting ready to go. And so at least if you're going to have a serious injury to a serious player, you kind of want to have it a little bit earlier in the season, especially if it's a lost season. You hate to see it affect a second season because it happened in December or early January.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. It's early enough where, he'll miss this year, and it's going to be like the Broncos get a top 10 worthy edge rusher added to that team next year. So, and we get to see some Malik Reed and Justin Hollins, sink or swim for those young guys. So we'll get a chance to see these things. But moving on now, we got our stock up and stock down section. And for me, first off, I got to say that I am with the Broncos trending towards the top 5, top 10 pick. I've been wide receiver round 1 as a guy for a while. Obviously, that's a little bit tongue-in-cheek because you never know who's going to be available. But, I wasn't sure if Cortland Sutton could be a number 1. Life after Sanders looked grim. And the trio of Hamilton, Winfrey, and Sutton is probably the slowest wide receiver trio in the NFL, excluding Sanders. So really wanted some talent there. But right now, picking top 5 instead of, that 11 to 16 range I thought they'd be at, offensive tackles become in a position where I'm really looking at guys here. That said, maybe we should not sleep yet on Garrett Bowles. Gosh, he's going to make me look like an idiot saying that this time next week probably. But, he's put to back-to-back okay weeks, and this is a stock report, so it's as much about where that guy's stock was coming into this game. If you're at the very top in your stock, you can't go that much higher. It's that kind of thing. So Garrett Bowles coming off that Bears game, horrible. Should have been, it was 4 holding penalties, should have been 5 or something like that. Just god awful. Not the best against the Packers either. No penalties, but got eaten up a few times by the Smiths, whether it be Za'Darius or Preston. But this game against the Jacksonville Jaguars, which I'll admit I was very apprehensive about. Calais Campbell, Yannick Ngakoue, Josh Allen, and these interior guys as well. But the Broncos gave up 0 penalties and 0 sacks from the offensive line. So Garrett Bowles has been playing better. It's almost like he has to relearn his technique because, hey, you can't hold, buddy. But he's playing a little bit better. There was that one play to the outside and the outside run that he messed up. But again, it's still inching in the right direction. The offensive line, everybody's, the offense they finally did put up 20 points. But the defense is people in disarray. Folks, Mike Munchak has this offensive line heading in the right direction, and perhaps nothing more imperative than Garrett Bowles starting to look average at left tackle. It's only 2 games. We'll see what happens. He's showing out a little bit more last year than we got right back to where we were, but I think Garrett Bowles at least deserves a little bit of credit in the stock up section for us today.
If he can turn Garrett Bowles into a quality starting left tackle in the NFL, he should get an extra induction into the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
How many busts? Because he's got one as a player, right? He should get one as a coach. And then I would say a special one just for I coached up Garrett Bowles to a quality starter.
He just needs an asterisk underneath him. Playing years, coaching years made Garrett Bowles relevant. Just the last
right. That would be huge. That again, it just eliminates one more problem that the Broncos have, if that can be the case. Like you said, it's 1 game. Now, I would say the Green Bay game, he was a little bit better than obviously he was in the Bears game. Bears game was about as bad as it can get. And so it showed a little bit of improvement, showed again another little bit of improvement. Now, can he have a third straight game here where he shows even more improvement, where he maybe, I thought his run blocking was actually worse than his pass blocking.
Right.
Which is kind of opposite of usually what Garrett Bowles does. So, I mean, it just, again, we'll have to see what he can do moving forward. But it is nice to see the offensive line go from giving up, 5-6 sacks last week to 0 sacks this week against, I would say, a pretty comparable defensive line to that of the Packers.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you got to give him his credit when it is due. I know he got booed and probably deservedly so. I'm not usually big on booing players, but I mean, he was having that kind of game. And then for me, I'm going to go the other side, the defensive line for the Broncos for stock up. I'm going to go Von Miller. And I mean, most times you could probably have him on here as just a guy that always makes an impact, but he really backed up the fact that he only gave a 12-second interview. You could tell that he was mad about the media and everything that was being said about this defense, especially about the sacks and everything else. Guy just goes out there, gets his 2 sacks, and I think he forced about 4 or 5 penalties?
Yeah, I believe so. I
mean, he just put the fear of God into, I'm trying to remember, Taylor, the right tackle for the Jaguars. And then even on the other side, you had Robinson, another one of your guys, that you really liked in the draft. And he had, I don't know how many, 4 or 5 penalties as well, trying to block Chubb. So
he had a fair amount of, I think he had 2 false starts and a hold. But he also was blasting open holes there in the second half.
That is true. That is very true. But again, Von Miller, I thought he had his best game of the season by far. Unfortunately, he did get that one big penalty, that roughing the passer right there on the final drive of the game. Second time this season that a roughing the passer call. And I mean, I always hate that. He didn't hit the helmet. He hit kind of around the chin area. And I just think that's ridiculous that they're calling some of those things. But I mean, that is what happens. Can't go back and change it now. But otherwise, Von Miller, great game. Need that the rest of the season from him for sure, just to show these young guys what it takes, the effort, the focus, everything else.
Yes, I agree with you. And, Von Miller's going to have to really step it up. And I think he's a guy, given the guaranteed cap hit and everything like that, he's a guy that's not being moved unless he really asks to be moved going forward. So good to see him stock up here. Had a good game. No doubt about it. Had a good game. So stock down for me. I'm going to go with Rich Scangarello in this one. I thought that specifically in the second half, I thought the first half was pretty well overall. They were throwing it around the yard. But when you finish with, 17-3 lead, and you finish with the limited amount of touches that we had from Royce Freeman and Phillip Lindsay in the run game, the Broncos are still running the ball at a pretty effective rate this season. The offensive line is doing better, and you have those 2 backs. I just like to see them be utilized more that way. That said, I'll talk about it here coming up here, but Freeman specifically in the pass game is a nice sign of things to come. But Scangarello, and I've been mostly fine with Scangarello. I feel like the offensive play calling, and maybe it comes down to execution too. We're not in the locker room or the film room, but I just thought that the game, they let them get a little bit away from them from the offense there in that second half. So Scangarello stock down just a little bit for me there.
Well, and it's tough when you watch that first half and you see some very intelligent play calling. Yeah. I loved in the run game, especially they were doing a lot of counter runs to really get the Jaguars moving side to side, using that speed against them, making them commit too far, boom, hit back on the other side. And it was really working well. That counter run by Lindsay there in the first quarter, I think it was, that really set up that first touchdown. That was pure genius. I love that play. And then the Noah Fant touchdown, they set up well, everything executed well. It worked great. Again, using that speed of the Jaguars against themselves. And the second half, they just got very conservative. We're just going to run it up the middle, We're going to do these quick, short passes and just kind of got away from what was working. The old saying of if it's not broke, don't fix it. Well, they tried to fix it. I see teams do this all the time against the Patriots, especially. Like, there's a lot of games where teams are beating the Patriots, and then they're going, oh no, we got to conserve this lead. And then they change up everything that they did to get that lead. And Patriots just come back, and it's just kind of going, why do you people keep doing this? And it's Gangarella, why did you do that? Now, again, like you said, part of it's the defense just gave up those long drives, but you still got to take advantage of what you got. And that definitely didn't happen, unfortunately. But my first stock down, I'm going to go Shelby Harris. And this is a little bit of, is it Shelby Harris or is it the coaching staff? Because putting him at nose tackle when he is, 290, 295 maybe?
Yeah, about that.
And telling him, we want you to go hold up against the big uglies. When you look at, the Packers have a huge offensive line. The Raiders had a huge offensive line. And you're asking this guy to take on double teams and hold his ground when that's not really his game. Last year, he showed when he is that 3-tech, 5-tech, and can shoot the gap, or when he is the nose tackle coming in on pass set moments, and he can shoot the gap, he is great. But that's not what he's being asked to do this year. And so it's kind of one of those, you're trying to put a square peg in a round hole and saying, good luck out there. And so I can't put all of this on Shelby Harris, but it's still, he's got to go do something. Even on pass downs, I'm not seeing him get the pressure like he did last year.
That's a good point. I feel like Shelby Harris, like we talked about, I feel like he's being miscast in this system, and it's got to be frustrating for him as a player on his contract season. I mean, you can play him at nose, but you're asking him to two-gap and push the pocket and eat up blocks where he is much better attacking a singular gap and winning with speed and quickness and leverage in that way. So, and I know that you want to play DeMarcus Walker. I know that you want to play Draymond Jones, who also kind of have that similar skill set. You know, they're not guys with the length or the sand in the pants to really anchor when you need to in those base packages. So, honestly, it comes down to continuing the way they are right now, the path they're on, or you're moving Shelby Harris out, and you need to probably, in that case, activate Mike Purcell, which means you need to deactivate one of Jones and Walker. So that's the situation you're in. I guess I put it to you. What would be your solution? Because like it stinks. I mean, Mark Walker's playing better. You need reps for Jones, but you probably need to put Harris in a situation to succeed at the same time, and the defense to succeed. And that would be Mike Purcell at nose tackle with Shelby Harris. Some people have talked about moving him to defensive end and base package. I don't think he can anchor or has the length of two gap that they want, that we see from Wolf and Gotsis. But in sub package, even playing one technique in sub package, but three technique in sub package, I think that's where he needs to be. If not, you probably need to look to move him, because you need to open up reps for other guys, and it's not a scheme fit right now. I mean, teams are attacking him repeatedly, and he's not holding up.
Right. I feel like this is two things. His value's probably never been lower, but at the same time, he's that one piece that I'm saying, because he is so miscast, he makes the most sense to trade.
Yeah.
And
I mean, even if it's a 6th-round pick.
Well, I don't know. I wouldn't take that. I want more than that, just because I think he brings more value than that. But at the same time, like you said, you got those two younger guys. You got Walker and Jones that you're trying to get those reps and those pass sets, because that's exactly what they bring to the team. And they both showed it in this past game. They both showed the ability to get into the backfield and make some plays. Walker got his sack. Jones should have had a sack. I'm just so mad about the tackling in that game. There's so many plays where they just blew it with their tackling. But beyond that, I mean, so are you taking reps away from them by putting Shelby Harris in a more advantageous situation? It's a very lose-lose situation right now for the Broncos.
Are we talking about this situation or other things?
Well,
sorry.
There's lots of things that is very lose-lose right now. But again, with this situation with Shelby Harris, it's just his best position. You've already got two young guys doing that.
Yep.
And while I do think he's better than Jones or Walker right now, you're still kind of, I mean, we've talked about it on this podcast, the odds of the Broncos making the playoffs right now, pretty slim.
Yep.
So you're trying to evaluate that young talent. You're trying to get them as many reps as you can because you want those guys to be bigger contributors next year, where probably Shelby Harris, not with the team next year. So again, like I said, it's just kind of this lose-lose situation where you want your most talented players on the field, but Harris just is kind of that tweener. He's not long enough to be that defensive end, but he's not big enough to be that nose tackle.
Yep, I agree with you. But moving on here, back to positives. For me, a guy that stock up, Josie Jewell. I mean, once he went out, everything imploded. But no, just kidding. That's, I mean, maybe that is a stock up because we saw what it would be like without him. I mean, they need him, but stock up for me. Hinted at it earlier. Won't spend too much time in it, but Royce Freeman didn't run the best in this game, and he left. I think he did leave some yards out there on the ground game, but he's looking more and more natural as the pass catcher out there, and as we're seeing, that's a huge part of the scheme of this offense. So hopefully he can continue that. He's not the most dynamic guy in space, but he's still showing the ability to flex out, run some solid routes, bring in the ball, and then, once you get him in space, that 235, 240-pound running back is a load to bring down. So stock up for me in that regard with Royce Freeman, just because getting running backs in the pass game is something I've had a bone to pick about this entire offseason, and they're starting to show it, and Freeman is showing a little bit more natural ability there as the season's progressing.
All right. Well, I'm going to go with, and this is kind of a hit and miss, I guess, a little bit on this guy, but Justin Simmons, I think he's becoming one of the better coverage safeties out there. He gave up 0 receptions in this last game on 3 targets, had 2 pass deflections, was just flying around the field when he needed to. Now, given that there's still those lapses sometimes in the run game, some of that was more Will Parks than it was Justin Simmons, though. I will say that. Will Parks was the one that, I mean, we'll talk about him here in just a second, so I don't want to take too much away from some of that. But I thought Justin Simmons, he's showing a guy that fits well in this system and seems like a guy that's starting to have things click more and more each week. And especially, like I said, in coverage, he is really showing what we hoped that he would be when the Broncos drafted him. And so I'm intrigued by what they're going to do with him after this season. Are they going to sign him long term and really have him anchor that secondary? Or is he going to be a guy that they're going to hope maybe gets that big contract somewhere else and get another 3rd round comp pick back?
Yeah, it'll definitely be interesting to see what they do with him. He's the guy that I'd be looking to bring back, but we'll see how the season plays out. Stock down now for me. Justin Hollins, you're talking about a guy who's improving and starting to take advantage of those coaching things. Hollins looks like a guy who is a 5th round rookie switching positions. So not unexpected. I don't mean that in any way, but he was just slow in his processing. You saw him kind of make some mistakes out there in the ground game last week, and the athleticism's there, the length is there, the mental side, the technique, the awareness, that's still a ways off yet. And there's a reason that he wasn't starting week 1 despite those tools he has. It was always going to take time for him, but he looks like a guy, as to quote Elway and some others, but when they reference rookie quarterback coming in, Hollins looks like a guy who's drinking through a fire hose right now. And not great when you've played a quarter of the season with everything else, but he's a rookie, 5th round rookie, always was considered decently raw. And again, switching from that edge rusher position to more of a sub-package off-ball guy. However, we'll see what happens with the Chubb injury and how they switch those roles and reps. But Hollins, for me, stock down, not a great game. I did want to put Corey Nelson. I was going to ask you for your next part up here, who was the worst player on the field this week. And the one you're saying next might have been the guy, actually. But It's either him or Corey Nelson. Because Corey Nelson, my God, does not belong. Wow.
No, he does not.
Not great.
But you're right. Justin Hollins, the Jaguars picked on him.
Yeah.
Kind of like the Broncos picked on when whoever substituted in for Ramsey.
Yeah.
The Jaguars did the same to Hollins. I think he gave up 2 touchdowns in this game. And I will say that double fake screen tight end up the middle play, that was genius. I mean, I think most veterans would have struggled with that play, but it was at Justin Hollins. And so feel for the guy, but that's kind of the name of the game right now. You're going to see a lot of young players getting reps and they're going to make mistakes on the field. And so then that kind of brings us to another guy that's on a rookie contract, but you would expect more because he's been in the league here now this is his 4th season, Will Parks. I thought that was probably his worst game I've ever seen him play.
Not good.
He was not great in coverage. Run support, he was one of the worst. I don't know how many tackles he missed that were he's meeting Fournette in the hole. And I understand Fournette's not an easy guy to take down, but that's your job. And he's supposed to be kind of that. I mean, that's what he was brought into the league for, was his enforcer ability. He was known as a very good tackler at the safety position and come downhill, play in the box, all those kind of things. And he did none of that. It was downright terrible. Really, all the big runs, Will Parks had opportunities to make tackles on, and every single one of them he missed. So just really downright terrible game. I haven't seen much from Will Parks this year that makes me think the Broncos want to ever bring him back. I think he still has a role in the NFL, but right now I think he's a replaceable player.
I don't disagree with you. He's definitely a solid special teams guy, but if he's starting out there for you, you're probably not having a great time. So finally, stock up here. My stock up, Malik Reed came in, had a sack, looked competent, and honestly, boy, we need you to step up. He's more of that Von Miller type than that Bradley Chubb type, given his size. But, this is your platform. This is why you're brought in. This is why you play the game. And so you're not going to be Chubb. I just need him to be the best version of Malik Reed he can be. He flashed in preseason. So this is as much about him notching his first career sack and flashing a bit there, but the platform is there now for him to take advantage. And undrafted free agent, I'm not expecting incredible things from him, but you never know. He has tools. He's shown flashes. So wait and see and hope for the best.
Yeah, I do worry teams are probably going to run at him quite a bit. And I mean, why wouldn't they? He's on the smaller side of things. Like you said, he's more of a speed guy than a power guy like Chubb. But like I said, I mean, you got to make the best that you can out of a bad situation. And thankfully, at least he's going to get a lot of reps. He's going to get himself really prepared for next season, being that rotational guy for the Broncos. So good to see that. And then this guy that I'm going to mention, I mean, we've probably ragged on him as much as anybody. And with the Broncos drafting him, but he had a great game, DeMarcus Walker. He had a great run stuff, had a great sack, was getting into the backfield, was one of the few guys really doing some great work there on the defensive line. And while I still think he's a little bit of a limited player, at least he's showing some flashes. He's showing what he can bring to the table, that first step quickness, that ability to get into the backfield, make a couple plays. And that's exactly what the Broncos needed, was some negative plays in the game. And he showed that for him. And hopefully he can continue down that path, because, I mean, this is a guy that's gone from looking like he might not make this roster to now looking like he's a playmaker for this defense.
Yeah, I agree with you. And luckily we have this year and next year, and he's going to get more and more snaps if he keeps taking advantage like he has been. Still not the best in the ground game, but that's not what you brought him in for. So I don't foresee him being the ideal substitution or replacement for a guy like Gotsis or Wolf, but sometimes you got to make do with what you have. So good to see him improving and taking advantage of his role after 2 years of being in flux and struggling. So, all right, well, that's going to finish up the stock report section of the Building the Broncos podcast today. We will be right back after these messages with an interview with Benjamin Allbright. Don't go anywhere.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
Alrighty, and welcome back to the Building the Broncos podcast. I'm Nick Kendell along with Carl Dumler, and now we are joined by the one and the only Ben Allbright. Ben, I see your middle name now because I'm on Skype, so I'm not going to throw that out there so the listeners can tease you with that, although, it's a pretty solid middle name there. I'll give you that. But
weirdos out there have already figured it out.
Yeah, I'm sure. Considering your internet troll fans that you have, I'm sure that there's more than that out there on the internet that I could find if I did some digging. But we're here today to talk about the Denver Broncos. 0-4. Things look like they might be getting worse, if that's possible, for the 2019 season. The schedule does not lighten up really, and now that they're out arguably not their best player, but I would argue their most valuable player. If you put him on the open market, I think he'd bring back the biggest return in Bradley Chubb. So 0-4. Ben, how did we get here?
Well, it's a confluence of things. And, I know the record says 0-4, but the one thing I've always hated most in this world is that stupid Parcells quote that says you are what your record says you are. Because this is not an 0-4 team. They've scored 2 go-ahead touchdowns inside of 2 minutes and lost both games. They were 2 plays away from running the Raiders game. They had some momentum in the Packers game until, turnovers got the better of them. It's a team that's, trying to figure it out. There are some roster holes, but you've got a new coach, new quarterback, and they're all trying to figure each other out. And honestly, this team is kind of changing identity. This team has been a kind of a defensive identity team for the last 5 years or so, and it's really kind of shifting back the other direction. It's kind of becoming an offensive identity team, something the Broncos really haven't been since Peyton Manning and Adam Gase were together. So, I think it's a combination of things, growing pains, trying to find the quarterback post Peyton Manning, making sure you get the right coach in there, and then, getting everybody comfortable with that guy's stuff. If you watch this season, they've gone into each game and we've picked out something to improve on, and they've improved on it. And then, you get to the next thing. And so I think that at this point, this team, the Achilles heel is figuring out how to stop the run and ultimately how to stop the pass in late game situations. But overall, it's a decent football team. The record doesn't reflect that right now, but, I think by week 10, we're going to be having a different conversation about this team.
Yeah, that's definitely – you can see the building blocks on there. We'll get to that. And something that I like to bring up when I'm talking about this, using the Broncos obviously as context, but there are so many games each season that could go either way. The ball bounces a certain direction. It changes the outcome. I mean, these are the NFL. There's a reason the point spreads are so close. The margin for error is so small. Last year you saw the Broncos – win a game in Los Angeles, they probably lose 6 out of 10 times. You see them win that game against the Steelers, easily could have lost that game, but they lose that game against Houston, easily could have won that. So a lot of toss-up games, and I feel like the Broncos right now, probably not a 3-1 team. The ball would have to have really bounced their way to do that. The 2 road games, probably definitive losses, but the home games, those felt like games that in a typical season – you're going to win those ones 50% of the times. Just a toss-up game, and unfortunately for the Broncos, granted they have nobody to blame but themselves. But from our perspective, from where we're at, those are kind of just the toss-up games that kind of will determine 4 to 5 games you have every season. Even back to the Super Bowl year with Peyton Manning, that Week 2 game where Jamal Charles fumbled the ball with 50 seconds left. That's something you can't predict. Those are just random bits of game, and the ball bounced their way in that one. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't bounce your way.
Yeah, I think, if you go back and look, this season is kind of the anti-Super Bowl season in a lot of ways. The ball bounced their way a lot that season. They had the fewest, I think the most games in NFL history decided by 1 score or fewer. It's just a situation where the margins are too thin on this team to sustain that kind of stuff. And so, there are a lot of young building blocks. There are good pieces on this team. Joe Flacco's having like the second best statistical season of his career at this point, bordering on first. And you look around at the young pieces on this offense, Cortland Sutton, Deshaun Hamilton, Royce Freeman, Philip Lindsay, Noah Fant. Those guys are kind of starting to come into their own. There's a lot of excitement, about the offense. The offensive line needs a little bit of help. Obviously you got Reisner. He's solid. McGovern's, pretty solid. Probably best suited as a guard, but solid. And then, you're going to have to figure out the rest of that offensive line. They throw a bunch of money at Jawan James. He's been hurt. Ron Leary's not going to be back next year. Garrett Bowles is unlikely to be back next year. So you're going to have to figure out that offensive line, but the skill position looks good. Then you flip over to the defensive side of the ball, and Wolf and Harris, their time's probably winding down here. Todd Davis as well, but Shelby's been a little underwhelming. Adam Gotsis was pretty good. The Bradley Chubb obviously hurt, and he's the future there. Vaughn probably got a couple of years left. The inside linebacker needs to be shoring up. You're going to have to figure some things out at the corner position. I like Bosby and what he's done, but, to be honest, he's probably best served as a third corner. Callahan had been healthy. Chris is probably gone. Justin Simmons is an exciting, safety that's going to get paid. And you've got all that money invested in Kareem. So there are holes more on the defensive side of the ball than the offense. Even with that, this defense is still holding offenses pretty well when the team isn't turning it over twice in the red zone.
Yeah, I keep thinking about. I was just going to say, I just keep thinking about the fact that they've been down about 4 or 5 starters most of these games. I mean, really, the Jaguars didn't do anything until Jewell went down, and then all of a sudden they could run like crazy. And so, I mean, yes, the depth is gone, but if they could have the actual full starters on the field, I think this would be a pretty potent defense.
Well, yeah, and you really want to think about it. I think, there's everybody's got different things they want to say. Some of them are, fire Vic Fangio, which is silly. If you're not willing to commit to a coach for a couple of years, what are you doing hiring in the first place? And then, you've got people that fire John Elway. Well, to be honest with you, the things that John hasn't done well, he's kind of started to turn around. The one thing that I still have a bone to pick with is the Broncos spend a lot of money on free agents with significant injury histories, and it doesn't really always work out for them. Nothing, I think, further evidence that than this past game when your biggest free agent hires were all sitting on the bench because they were all hurt. Callahan, James, all those guys. So Kareem Jackson. It's tough when you bring in guys and you pay a lot of money to guys that can't get on the field. And so that's if there's one thing to knock John Elway for, that's certainly it. And I don't want to bash the guy or anything else. And I know, I have a Broncos partnership show, and people accuse me of carrying water for the team, which is kind of silly. I'm a lifelong Kansas City Chiefs fan. I'm trying to be optimistic about the team I cover, but this idea that I'm in the tank for the Broncos because my show is partnered with the team is ludicrous. They have no editorial content. I just want to be honest about the situation. Yeah, it sucks that they're 0-4, but really there's two things you can do at that point. You can sit there and whine about it, or, you can try to look for the bright spots and be optimistic. And I'm trying to be the latter. I don't want to sit here and be hot take radio and, sit here and be, a guy that bashes John Elway for ratings and all that kind of stuff. If they want that stuff, they can go up the dial. 1089 The Hater. It's up the dial up there. They can go listen to that stuff. I'm trying to keep it honest, and I'm just trying to find bright spots because let's be honest, it sucks being 0-4. So you try to find the positive things to be positive about.
Yeah, absolutely. Being a draft guy, it's obviously still sucky to be 0-4, but and as horrible as this is, the sooner the people kind of start to look at the draft, I don't mind that. Granted, I'm looking at the 2021 draft already, starting to get that kind of stuff together. So some people are psychopaths like that. But 0-4, I mean, there's bright spots. You have to allow some room for nuance. Otherwise, you're going to be a pretty unhappy person. Don't let the lows get you too low or the highs get you too high, and you're going to be doing okay in life. That's my thought. And good job there, not disparaging anybody for throwing it out there. I mean, there are some hot take artists out there, whether it be the rah-rahs over too far drinking the Kool-Aid or the everything is horrible pit of misery people. Got to find that balance. So, again, bringing it back to the Broncos here, though. You've talked about a bunch of things. What would you say are the 3 biggest issues for this team in 2019? Well, obviously, there's a lot of issues.
Right. They can't stop the run. And with Josie out, Josie's the run funnel guy, but Josie's a liability in coverage. We saw that in the Green Bay game when that fullback blew right by him, and I cringed. To
be fair, that fullback is an absolute freak athlete. If you remember him from the combine, he had like an insane combine.
Still a fullback. Right, but that's still a fullback. And if you're going to be a linebacker in the NFL, you can't let a fullback just blow right by you, especially if you're a guy who's limited athletically like Josie, you're going to have to, your instincts going to have to read what he's doing. You're going to have to be able to get out there, can't get sucked in on the run on that kind of stuff. And Josie is. I mean, it sucks because, Josie Jewell is an all-world athlete, in a sport that's full of all-world athletes. And so, considering him against the whole populace, he's in the top 1% athletically, but then you get him into the NFL, and he's kind of a liability going away from the ball. So it stinks because they really don't have the inside backers that they need. Shelby Harris has been a bit of a disappointment in the push he's able to generate, in the A gaps. So if we're going to criticize the team, let's be honest in our criticisms, and then those are definitive criticisms. Offensively, penalties and turnovers have killed them. The Broncos were number 5 fell in yards per drive, and then 22 in points per drive. And the reason for that is drive-killing penalties and turnovers. They get across the 50, and then somebody get a hold, or they get sacked, and or they'd have a drop on third down, or things like that. You go back and look. I mean, Deshaun dropped a touchdown in that Raiders game. Joe Flacco got sacked out of field goal range. They convert both those two things. All of a sudden, that Raiders game looks totally different. You get over the Packers game, and you see the same kind of thing. The ball slips out of Flacco's hand, and Savage makes that great interception. They had a couple other sacks here or there that took them behind schedule. The offense, it's shown the ability to get points when it needed them. You can look no further than the end of the Chicago or the end of the Jacksonville games for that. They put drives together and go get you points. I just like to see a little more consistency with that. I think that comes with this quarterback, this offensive coordinator, these players all kind of getting more confident and getting to know each other. But I think right now the liability on this team is the defense, specifically in the run game. And then on the offense, it's the offensive line. This offense cannot afford penalties. And unfortunately, if you have an offense that uses a lot of plays to get down the field, you put yourself at risk for penalties.
Sorry to interrupt, folks, but we have to take one more commercial break before we return to our interview with Benjamin Allbright. Don't go anywhere.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
Alrighty, and we are back on the Building the Broncos podcast. Nick Kendell here, along with Carl Dumler, and we are in the midst of an interview with Benjamin Allbright.
Did you think the offensive line maybe turned a little bit of a corner this last week? Because, Jacksonville has a pretty good defensive line when you're looking at all those pieces that they have there. And yet Broncos gave up 0 sacks and really, for the most part, moved the ball when they wanted to. The second half kind of things got out of control. But beyond that, the offensive line, I thought, held up about the best I've seen them in a long time.
Yeah, I thought, I thought that the offense has been coming together for a couple of weeks. You've seen flashes of it. It looked bad in the Oakland game, let's be honest. It looked disjointed, but it's started to come together each week. I felt like it's improved each week. And if you use the crawl, walk, run, methodology, I would say they're in a light jog. I think they broke that streak of the 20-point stuff. I think they're starting to look, a little bit better. They're gaining confidence in themselves that they can get bigger plays. They're gaining confidence in themselves that they can block. I'd like to see a little more dominance out of the run game. I felt like that's been a little bit lacking, specifically efficacy on a per carry basis. But now that Janovich is back, I think that'll help. Phil Lindsay really likes having Janovich out there to pave the way for him, and I think that's going to help him.
Yeah, so Broncos 0-4. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Lost one of their best players. Only one team since, I believe, 1972 has made the playoffs after starting 0-4. Dan Fouts led Chargers, I believe, 1992. So I guess the question now is, it's probably dominating the airwaves over Denver. Are there players that the Broncos are shopping, and are there players that you think the Broncos should be shopping at this point, as they season's not over, but as they transition to more of an eye to the future?
Well, no. To be blunt, no, they're not shopping anybody just yet. It doesn't mean they won't, but they're not right now. Last year, the Indianapolis Colts started the season 1-5, and ended up making a playoff run, into the playoffs. So, they won a playoff game. I think that and the scenarios there are kind of similar. They had some injuries they had to deal with. They had a rookie head coach.
Can we borrow their quarterback?
I believe he's retired now, but Well, to be honest, again, go back and look at the Joe Flacco's numbers. He's doing it all right. Joe Flacco is not the problem with this football
He's not
team.
the problem. No.
I know it's popular nationally to bag on Joe Flacco because all that is Joe Flacco elite crap, but Joe Flacco's playing reasonably well. He's had a couple of miscues. The ball slipped out of his hand on that interception, the Jags game. Ball slipped out of his hand on that Packers interception. But, I think Joe Flacco's playing reasonably well. I think the main thing is making sure you got the offensive line to execute and getting the defensive stuff fixed. It's tough when you've been playing in the same system for a couple of years and then you switch to something that's philosophically totally different. Just ask the Packers offense. It's kind of funny how that team is kind of on the opposite trajectory of the Broncos in that they were forever known as an offensive team and they're slowly becoming a defensive identity team. Off the script, the Packers offense has been terrible this year. So it's, I think with the Broncos that people are upset right now because they're 0-4. We expected better. But I think the thing to kind of keep in mind is it's a long season. There are still 12 games left. So it's really not outside the realm of possibility. I mean, you want to go back, like I said, to 1-5 just last year. The Texans were 0-3 before they went on a playoff run, and those two teams were in the same division. So it's not like they were in soft divisions cannibalizing each other. I think if you want to be optimistic, you can look at those things and say, hey, look, this offense feels like it's starting to come together. There are still some misfires and miscues, but it feels like it's starting to come together. And to be honest with you, outside of about the first drive of every game, I felt like Rick Scangarello's been a pretty decent play caller. I haven't cared for his opening scripted drives, dating all the way back to game one with that tight end jet sweep that still blows my mind. But I think overall he's kind of coming into his own play call. He's really got to learn that in the NFL, there are no throwaway possessions. In college football, you can use a possession and set up a future possession because you're going to get more of them. In the pro game, you don't. And I think that's one mindset he needs to maybe kind of really wrap his head around because I've seen a few of those throughout the season.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I guess I need to go back and watch that Jags game again. The limited usage of the running game in the second half, probably a little Monday morning quarterbacking there. But granted, the Jags had the ball, 10-plus minutes in the third quarter, so kind of hard to have any sort of offensive chemistry or consistency when you don't have the ball. So you're talking about the offense starting to trend in the right direction. I want you to go into a little bit more detail. I did a piece last week about this young emerging offensive core, and granted, with spending money and draft capital early in the draft on the offense, and not on the defense, there's something to be said there, but the offense really does feel like it's close. It's kind of like kindling on the fire where they still need maybe a couple more logs to really, get a sustainable fire going. But there are pieces there that the offense has at least the structure, the base, if you will, to have a competent group there for the next, 3-5 years.
Yeah, I think the foundations are in place. I think ever since the Broncos shifted their draft philosophy 2 years ago, and quit trying to chase uber athletes and coach them up into football players and went out and got team captains, 3-4-year starters, football guys, football players. I think it's paid dividends. I think last year's class was a home run. I thought this year's class has the potential to be. I mean, in camp, we saw Juwan Winfrey show some real flashes. Hollins could be something. Reed could be something. We've already seen Dalton Reisner's probably something. I felt like Drew Lock kind of has that it factor. He comes back off the injury. If the Broncos are out of contention, it's going to be tough to keep him off the field. And I feel like Noah Fant, tight end takes a long time to develop. So people that are crying about Noah Fant and expecting some kind of dominance because he's a first round tight end. There's only been 1,000-yard receiving rookie season by a tight end in NFL history. It was Mike Ditka in 1961. And so even in the modern game, in the modern era of uber athletic tight end pass catchers, still haven't had a 1,000-yard season out of one of those guys. 500 yards and 4 touchdowns out of a rookie tight end, honestly, is a phenomenal season.
Yes.
Waiting Noah Fant, we're looking at what he could be in 2.5 years. That we're getting production out of him now is just gravy. So I think there's a lot to be excited about. in terms of the youth on this team. And I think there are some pretty obvious holes, and I don't think anybody's trying to deny that. I think that it is what it is. What else were you going to do? You go back and look at the quarterback situation. What else were we going to do? Draft Josh Allen. That's kind of been hit or miss. Draft Josh Rosen. That really hasn't, looked all that great. Bring in Kirk Cousins. He's not looking all that spectacular. They brought in Case Keenum, which was kind of the best of what was left, and they brought in Joe Flacco because that was, kind of the best that they could do. And you look around at, at your other options, and to be honest with you, a lot of this is fostered back on the fact that Paxton Lynch was such a bust that set the team back.
Yep.
So that's really what it is in the end. It's just, you don't think John Elway wants to win. You don't think these coaches want to win. You don't think these players want to win. I mean, they do. John Elway's hyper competitive. They're just trying to make the best of what they've got and what they're able to do. What else are they going to do? What magic piece are they missing that John Elway deserves to be fired on for not pursuing?
Yeah. No, you are correct. I mean, you think the Vikings would take a Flacco for Kirk Cousins trade right now? Honestly, probably, yeah. And they're paying him buco bucks and stuck there. So that's a good point. Obviously, Flacco is not a problem. You put this offense and how they're moving the ball, controlling the ball on that 2016 team with that defense. I mean, we're talking about a legitimate playoff contender, a well-balanced team. It's not really how it's built right now. Obviously, a lot of transition going on, and coupled with what is playing out to be the toughest schedule in the NFL, kind of stinks. The Broncos finished third place, and their matchups, AFC third place matchups, end up being the Bills and the Browns, are arguably the two most improved teams in the AFC this year. So it's just a lot of stuff stacked against the Broncos, and if they don't make the playoffs, that's not the end-all, be-all. But long season to go yet, like you've been saying. Speaking of long season to go, would you say that the offensive line, we talked about a little bit, is trending in the right direction? You talked about Reisner. You talked about McGovern being a guy maybe to resign. We'll save that for a second. But, Bowles, Wilkinson, and you said Leary maybe not coming back too, but mainly the tackles. Are you feeling that, because from what I've seen, they are somewhat limiting the offensive output? People are arguing or complaining, you're not seeing Fant used vertically down the seam. Well, when your two offensive tackles are struggling in pass protection, you need to help them. Stuff like Flacco, holding onto the ball. Well, the offensive tackles are limited passing, going the check down. Offensive tackles struggling in pass protection. So thoughts on those two? Garrett Bowles may be trending in the right direction after that Bears game, but still, not exactly what you want from a left tackle.
Well, yeah, at least Garrett's not. I mean, it was a low bar to clear in terms of improvement, but at least he's not being a liability anymore. That's step one. Let's stop being a liability. We'll work on being an awesome, being awesome and doing those kinds of things. As far as that kind of stuff goes. But right now, I think the main thing is making sure he's just not a liability, and then we'll go from there. I think that it's been tough because he has been. I mean, that whole stadium when that holding call got called on Ron Leary, that should have been on Garrett Bowles in that disastrous game. It was a collective exhale. I mean, everybody just kind of just exhaled so hard because it was at the point where Garrett Bowles, a Denver Bronco, was getting booed at home, and that's saying something. So I think that, with Bowles, you've got a great coach in Mike Munchak. And to hammer that home, look at how bad Pittsburgh's offensive line has looked this year in the absence of him, and it's the same players. And I thought watching that game last night, I was like, the Broncos aren't as bad as either one of these teams. The Bengals and the Steelers. I don't think the Broncos are as bad as either one of those teams. So I think that if you look at this stuff and you say, okay, well, where are we? A shoring up offensive line and probably inside linebackers and defensive tackle away, and then we're going to need some corner help. And that's really the problem with this team is that, your number 5 corner to start the season is playing number 2 corner right now. Your inside linebackers are athletically limited, and the ones that are athletes aren't that good. And then you got a defensive tackle that you brought back that's kind of been a disappointment, his ability to get push.
There you go. Yep. So not going in the right direction, their offensive line, obviously defensive line struggling I want to bring it back. We spoke a lot last year in the pre-draft phase, especially the combine leading up, how the Broncos were super in need for cornerback in that draft, citing Baker, DeAndre Baker and Byron Murphy as a couple guys the Broncos could trade back and target. Now, the need is still there, obviously. I will say, from the limited flashes, Greedy Williams is playing well. I don't know if I love him in this scheme. DeAndre Baker is really struggling, and Byron Murphy is hit or miss. But this upcoming cornerback class looks a lot better. Are you raising that to the top of your needs entering this offseason, or is it just, the Broncos are at a position where they can't be super picky on the individual position and just need to look for difference makers, point blank?
Yeah, I think you just need to look for difference makers and go from there. I think it's obvious the corner's a glaring need. I think it's obvious that inside linebacker's a glaring need. And I think it's obvious that you have some offensive line issues that are glaring needs, as well as, like I said, a nose tackle. I really wanted them to bring Dalen Mack in this offseason in the draft, but then, obviously Baltimore did that. I think everybody wanted Devin Bush, the inside linebacker. Look at how well he's playing. There's some validation there. There was a disagreement between the coaching staff and the front office on him anyway. The coaching staff did want him, and there was some information there, I guess, with Jim Harbaugh and Vic Fangio having their connection on him as a player. But, and I'm sure that looking back, there's some regret with that. But that allowed them to get Noah Fant, allowed them to get Dalton Reisner and Drew Lock, and it's going to allow them to get another player. So, I feel like that they think that deal could ultimately work out in their favor. But in the end, yeah, they just need to go out and get players, finish out this roster and get the players so there aren't any liabilities and go from there. And, you're always going to have injuries. You're always going to have ball that bounces the wrong way. You're always going to have disappointment, things like that. But, you get enough of the right players in here, you're going to be able to compensate for that.
All righty. Well, before we get you out of here, I do want to ask you, the Broncos, two more questions. The Broncos, let's say hypothetically the season continues to go off the rails and they are facing a top 3 pick, and I would say arguably right now the top 3 players in this upcoming draft, the most likely guys to go 1, 2, and 3, don't know what order yet, would be Tua Tagovailoa, quarterback Alabama, Justin Herbert's quarterback Oregon, and Chase Young, edge rusher from Ohio State. Is there any, given that the quarterback with Drew Lock there, obviously still an unknown, and edge rusher Von Miller and Bradley Chubb, is there any chance that the Broncos would end up taking one of those 3 players? We've seen teams in the past few seasons, over the last decade, like the Panthers moving from Jimmy Clausen to Cam Newton, the Browns going from Deshaun Kaiser to obviously Baker Mayfield. Is there a chance that a quarterback staring there in the face, even if they like Drew Lock, they didn't take him top 10, is that a direction that you could see the Broncos going?
Well, they really like Herbert, and that I guess supposed to be a possibility if you lose faith in Flacco and Lock by then. Chase Young, I think, is a guy you look at. You need a Derek Wolfe replacement. I don't think that he's exactly I think he's more of a 43 end in the pros, but he could fit there. If you run kind of a hybrid 34 under front, he could be a hell of a guy there. I think Chase Young's the most likely. Herbert, could be in the mix too. It won't be. And to be honest with you, I don't think he's going top 3. I'm not 100% on that. I've talked to a lot of people around the league who are a lot lower on him than the media is. There are some people that really like him, but he's going to be one of those people that really splits people. There are a lot of people that feel like he's kind of got a Mariota factor to him, that he's buoyed by the system talent around him, and not really all that. As a quarterback, spotty ball placement. He's got elite receivers, an elite line, elite run game, elite defense. And this never really put into pressure situations. And the few times that he has been, he's really kind of folded. So, I don't know that Tua is going to go as high as people think he is.
That's a good point. Listening to Bucky Brooks and Daniel Jeremiah talk back in the past, though, about Baker Mayfield, and obviously you have your own sources here, so it might conflict with that, but it did sound like most people had Sam Darnold as quarterback 1, but all it took was that one team to have Baker Mayfield 1 overall and take him. So we'll see with the Dolphins and everything they're leaning in there. Final question before we get you on out of here. Broncos have a lot of free agents coming up in this upcoming cycle. Obviously we've listed a good chunk of them. The entire starting defensive line, Chris Harris Jr., Emmanuel Sanders, Connor McGovern, et cetera, Justin Simmons, Will Parks. If there are 3 players that are set to hit free agent, you're the GM, let's say money's not really a big factor here. Obviously, you're not paying crazy money, but money's not the overriding factor here. If you could bring back 3 guys that are set to hit free agent to help this team 2020 and beyond, who are those 3 guys?
Are you asking for what I would do or what I think will happen?
Let's do both. Let's hear what you would do first and then what you think would happen.
Well, they're going to keep Gotsis and Simmons for sure. What were the other names you listed there? McGovern, they'll keep him. So
okay, those are the big 3 for me.
Yeah, those would be the 3 that they'll keep. What I would do, probably along the same lines. I can tell you, Wolf has been contemplating retirement for years with all the injuries and not winning. It would take a heck of a convincing job, I think, to get him to play one more contract. He doesn't want to leave Denver, so he'd take a hometown discount just to stay. As far as the others, Chris and Emmanuel, they're gone. Those guys are both looking for paydays. And while Chris would love to stay in Denver, I talked to him last week for quite a while, and he would love to stay in Denver. But the Broncos, he knows that, everybody understands the nature of the business. The Broncos aren't going to meet his price point. It's his last chance to cash in and make a paycheck to support his family for the rest of his life. So. I think that those 2 are gone. Ron Leary is going to be gone. Will Parks is probably not going to be back unless they get him really cheap. He's not really been the fit that they thought he was going to be. Who else? What were the other names?
There's obviously Andy Janovich is a guy. There is both Shelby Harris is one. Those are 2 that stand out to me as far as starters. I mean, that's decent amount of players.
Because of his special teams value, I don't think you're going to see Shelby back.
Okay. And so the guys you said definitely not back for sure. Shelby Harris, Chris Harris Jr., and Emmanuel Sanders. At what point do you think that these guys are being shopped, if they are being shopped? Or is it more the Broncos playing the long game with 2021 compensatory picks?
That's exactly what it is. They're stacking the season with compensatory picks, so that's why they're not going to deal them unless they get better than 3rd-round offers for the guys. So they're not shopping them per se. If somebody wants to come in and offer them that, then cool. But they're kind of the mindset that, hey, most of these guys are going to be either leaving, retiring, whatever, and signing big contracts elsewhere. So their plan is to take the big compensatory pick package that they'll get out of that, and kind of roll with that, and they don't want to mess that up. If anybody were to get dealt, I would suggest it might be Emmanuel Sanders and probably to the 49ers. But, and that would free up some reps for a guy like Juwan Winfrey. If you're just out of it and you want to get the young guys some reps, that allows you the opportunity to get Winfrey some reps.
Also more target share for a guy like Deshaun Hamilton, which you're going to need to be making decisions on going forward, how much more his role will expand, if at all.
Yeah, he's got to fix it. He's had some balls hit him, pretty close and dropped that he's got to fix, and he knows that. If you're going to be the slot, soft spot in the zone guy, you've got to be sure-handed guy, and he has not been that.
Especially if you don't offer explosive yards after catch ability or vertical seam stretching ability, neither of which Hamilton has really shown so much as far as a great trade compared to other guys in the NFL that can do that stuff. So,
yeah.
Alrighty, Ben. Well, thank you very much for coming on here today and talking us down, talking Broncos country down a little bit. Is there anything you want to promote or talk about before we get on out of here?
I mean, just listen to Broncos country tonight. On KOA. It's 8:50 a.m. heard in 38 states and 3 countries. 94.1 FM if you're in Denver. Or, streaming on the web at broncoscountrytonight.com. And we, like I said, we're not carrying water for the team, but, we're trying to find bright spots. We're not, we don't want to sit here and cry about the thing. If you want that, you can find that somewhere else.
All right. And one last question to put you on the spot. Just a guess here. Locke plays week what? It could be not at all. It's totally up to you.
Not sure. I personally think that toward the end of the season, when you are officially eliminated from playoff competition, then you play him. Obviously, there's a health factor. He can't even come come off the IR until like week 9. So, I suspect that you'll probably see 2 games out of Drew Lock this year, maybe week 16, week 17. Maybe you get more if Joe Flacco gets hurt, but my guess is 2 games.
Alrighty. You guys heard it here. That's Ben Allbright. Thank you very much for coming on, and you have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, absolutely. You guys take care.
Alrighty, well, that's going to wrap up today's episode of Building the Broncos, powered by Overtime Media. You can find Carl on Twitter at Carl Dumler MHH and myself at Nick Kendell MHH. Also want to thank Ben Allbright for coming on today. We wanted originally to do a 10 to 15 minute segment, and it lasted 30. Tends to happen on here. We have a lot of questions. We want a lot to talk about, so I want to thank him for taking the time, coming on here, and just talking some football. Ben's a great guy. Also, make sure you guys head on over to Mile High Huddle, an affiliate of the Maven Coalition and Sports Illustrated. Head on over to iTunes, leave us a 5-star rating and a comment, as your support can help us continue to bring you our Denver Bronco deep dives. You can follow the Building the Broncos podcast and all our other great audio content by subscribing to Huddle Up Podcast wherever you listen to your shows. You can follow us on Twitter at Mile High Huddle and at BTB Football Pod. For Carl and Ben, I'm Nick, wrapping up another episode of the Building the Broncos podcast. We hope you guys enjoyed it, and we will see you soon. Go Broncos.
You've been listening to Building the Broncos. Join Broncos Country's deep divers at milehighhuddle.com to keep the conversation going.